of the fake, delusional, and disingenuous. He stands as a beacon of truth. He is Abuki Cabal. You are listening to Abuki Cabal.
Welcome to the Abuki Cabal Show.
What's going on, everybody? Sorry I've been down for a little while. You know, work never stops. Gets heavier sometimes, then lighter. Again, I apologize. Thank you for everybody who's stuck with me and continue to support the channel. And please continue to share, like, and subscribe. Today, I want to talk about another story here that's been kind of plaguing me for a while here, because there is a narrative that's being pushed that there are massive numbers of transgendered individuals being murdered and killed across the country. And we're going to take a look at that. A couple of different articles and some data that I was able to go ahead and pull up. And one of the first articles here is that I was looking at is the one from NBC online, and it was talking about killings of transgendered Americans reach all-time high. A rights group says at least 31 trans and gender non-conformative people, conforming people, have been killed in the U.S. so far this year, according to the Human Rights Campaign. We're going to take a look at that and just kind of show some of what's kind of going on. Right. All right, and here's that same article, another article that was written in 2021 concerning the number of trans and non-conforming individuals who were killed in that year. And as you can see, they say it's the deadliest year, and we're going to get right into this.
2021 is now the deadliest year on record for transgender people. This article was originally published by the 19th on November 9, 2021. The list of names now is longer than it's ever been. With nearly 2 months left, 2021 has shattered the record of transgender homicides in a year, with 45 to date. Most of them Black or Latinx, according to the Human Rights Campaign. Last year held the previous record with 44 trans murders. Marquisha Lawrence, a 28-year-old Black transgender woman in South Carolina, was killed on November 4. In a statement, Tori Cooper, Director of Community Engagement for the Transgender Justice Initiative for HRC, called Lawrence's death a tragic milestone for her and for a community that deeply loved her. Read more. Texas is pushing the most anti-trans bills in the country. Advocates fear deadly consequences. We must commit to honoring trans lives and ending the horrific epidemic of violence that plagues our community, Cooper said. Marquisha deserved nothing less than our full commitment to building a better future for trans people. The transgender writer and activist Raquel Willis called the news demoralizing and unexpected given the lack of investment in trans communities of color in recent years. I think that there have been consistent failures at addressing transgender people in the system of oppression that we're constantly facing, Willis said. Overwhelmingly, the leadership of our largest LGBTQ pride organizations are not Black and brown trans women, or people in particular, and overwhelmingly they are not addressing our needs. 4 more Black trans people were killed this year than last year, per HRC data. In a tweet Tuesday night, White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre called the killings unacceptable. Our hearts are with all who knew and loved the 45 people who have been killed this year, she wrote. The march to end this epidemic of violence continues. David Johns, executive director of the National Black Justice Coalition, said that providing financial support for Black trans women and decriminalizing sex work, which many trans women must turn to when denied other forms of employment, is an important part of addressing the underlying inequalities that leave trans women of color vulnerable to violence. At the core for me, it's about acknowledging that trans folks are often economically disadvantaged, much like other Black, queer, non-binary, non-conforming folks to no fault of their own, he said. Johns also said that the Biden administration needs to ensure that Black trans people are protected under existing hate crime laws. Read more. More Americans now know transgender people, but most still don't seem to understand them. Lawrence's death comes as transgender communities across the world prepare to honor transgender homicide victims for Transgender Day of Remembrance, an annual vigil on November 20th for those slain living their truths. The somber event often includes a reading of the names of the dead, a list that's grown longer in recent years as anti-transgender violence has spiked due to discrimination that advocates say has been fueled by an anti-trans political climate. More anti-trans bills were passed in 2021 than in any other year, with 9 bills cracking down on transgender youth participation on extracurricular sports and another limiting adolescent access to gender-affirming medical care. Advocates have repeatedly raised concerns this year that language in those bills, which often characterizes trans girls as boys, would spur more violent attacks against trans people. The tally of transgender murder victims has increasingly been common practice since the stabbing of Rita Hester in Boston in 1998. The death of Hester, who was misgendered by both mainstream and LGBTQ+ media, inspired transgender activist Gwendolyn Ann Smith to launch a website honoring those killed. The site would, in turn, spur Transgender Day of Remembrance as well as the practice of taking stock of those lost to violence. But advocates warn that such totals can be flawed. In 2018, LGBTQ+ media organization GLAAD cautioned news outlets from sensationalizing stories about the deadliest year on record for transgender people without context. The organization pointed out that anti-trans murders often go inaccurately reported because of misgendering by police and media. As law enforcement and media have become more sensitive to trans people, reporting has improved, sometimes increasing visibility of those killed, advocates said.
Okay, there's a lot to kind of go over there. That last part there, where they're talking about, misgendering, misidentification of individuals who are trans. That is put in there, and I've seen that in other areas where totals of the number of people who are actually affected by violence or by not having access to resources is always put in that context, because whatever number that they give, they always try to say that the number is a lot higher because people are misidentified or misgendered. There's a push for more funding to trans farmers and different identifying farmers now. And the numbers of that is like 0.4%, but they want larger or more access to resources to coincide with their numbers. And I had to compare and contrast that to the numbers of Black farmers who have been kept from resources for generations. Not only that, but losing their land and all kinds of things. And I don't see as much of a push to rectify the lack of funding for Black farmers as I see for this group, which is a lot less. And as you can see here, they talked about, the numbers here in this article, and there are 45 people, and that was in November of 2021. Okay, that was almost the end of the year. 45 people were murdered. Now, if you compare and you contrast that with the numbers of black men who were murdered in that year, I want to say that the numbers were around, let's say, about 5,000. But we'll look into that as well. But there's no national day of remembrance for all the black people who were murdered by in police altercations or any of that, and a lot of people will probably push back on that and say, hey, well, they were criminals and all of this, but there's a lot of criminal activity that goes on that they never associate with this transgendered and non-gender conforming people as well, that they never want to talk about. They never want to talk about the prostitution involved, the not telling people that they are transgendered, to give the person a choice in that matter, things of that nature. And when you talk about these things, then they're always put into the form of you being anti trans or gay people or whatever the case may be, or you're trying to put them in harm's way, or you're going to cause murders. You're going to cause these people to be harmed in some way by talking about the issues in a fair and an upfront way. You can talk about the issues and the numbers of people without actually taking a stance one way or the other. And if you're going to do something about a problem, I would think that you would have to, speak about the problem in a way that is upfront and transparent. Let's go down a little bit more here. And you see how here in this part here where it says, I think that there have been consistent failures at addressing transgender people and the system of oppression that we're constantly facing, Willis said, overwhelmingly by the leadership of the LGBTQ pride organizations are not black and brown trans people. So see, you see where they're putting this emphasis on black and brown in order to gain more for those who are other than black and brown. They're putting black and brown on the forefront, yet you see the beneficiaries of this movement are largely white and LGBTQ, etc. This is reminiscent of what happened when sex was added to the Civil Rights Bill. When they added sex, the beneficiaries of adding sex to that were not black people. They were white women, largely. When benefits were divvied out in the form of affirmative action, it's historically shown that white women were the biggest beneficiaries of this, and white women are benefiting from this LGBTQ movement as well, and they are some of the biggest backers of this. We're also seeing a lot of the backers are black women who have ascribed to white feminist talking points in using the LGBTQ movement and the people as allies. So you'll see on television, you'll see LGBTQ people speaking on women's issues like abortion and whatnot, things that don't even really largely affect them. And you'll see women on the other side championing LGBTQ rights and any type of transgression that is the position of the day. So let's move on down here. And you see where the White House has given a White House Deputy Press Secretary gave a statement on this, for 45 people in that year. I wonder if there was a statement given on the number of black people, and there was some political push towards trying to minimize those numbers as well as do what has been advocated for generations since 1965. I went all the way back to 1930, where they've said that, funding, more resources should be allocated towards Black men. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing more advocating towards these marginalized, much smaller communities than Black folks, and I take issue with that. And I've this has been a stratagem that has taken place for quite a while to leech resources off of the civil rights agenda in this country towards sexual affiliation and sexual choices, which I don't think fall into the same category. And there used to be some pushback against that, where and I'll go into that later on, where basically church groups and civil rights groups wrote letters back in the 90s, to publications saying that basically your issues are not Black issues. I mean, your issues are totally separate from the civil rights issues of Black people. So don't lump us in with your fight. Your fight can be different than ours, and be legitimate without you basically leeching power off of and velocity off of our trajectory going forward. So I will go over that article in some future content as well. But we'll move on to the next article here. But as you can see, they go back and they track this, back, and they said it had started, in 1998, with this stabbing of Rita Hester. Okay, I can go back even farther than that. I can tell you numerous people who were lynched, murdered, killed by the police. That these people were disappeared, and there is no outcry. I mean, there are museums and whatnot. You have Black women trying to separate from the Black community who are also they want their personal cut of resources and money, and Black men be damned. So this is, like I said, a stratagem on trying to take power from the larger communities and problems that should be addressed as far as civil rights are concerned, in my opinion. Okay, let's move on to the next article here. And in 2021, I guess the total number of transgender people, the deadliest year on record by Forbes, was 375, is what they say. Okay, so we'll go into this one.
"375 transgender people murdered in 2021, deadliest year since records began." Members of the transgender and LGBTQ community hold candles as they take part in the vigil of the Transgender Day of Remembrance in order to pay tributes to victims of hate crimes in Uganda and all over the world. In Kampala, Uganda, on November 23, 2019. The event comes after a number of attacks on the LGBTQ community in Uganda in recent months, and follows the arrest of 120 people in a raid on an LGBTQ-friendly nightclub in Kampala on November 10, 2019. A colonial-era law outlaws gay sex in the country. Many LGBTQ people continue to be victims of violence from hate crimes. Photo by Sumi Sadrini/AFP. Photo by Sumi Sadrini/AFP via Getty Images, AFP via Getty Images. 375 transgender people were killed this year. 2021, a figure that has risen since last year's total of 350. The report authors say this makes 2021 the deadliest year of violence against gender-diverse people since records began. 1 in 4 of those murdered were killed in their own home. The annual global list is released for Transgender Day of Remembrance, held on November 20 each year. The majority of the murders happened in Central and South America, 70%. But like last few years, the most deaths in a single country occurred in Brazil, totaling 33% of global deaths. Cases from Greece, Kazakhstan, and Malawi were reported for the first time too. The report notes that the numbers indicate a worrying trend when it comes to the intersections of misogyny, racism, xenophobia, and hate towards sex workers. It found that most victims were Black and migrant trans women of color and trans sex workers. 9 in 10, 96%, of those murdered globally were trans women or trans feminine people. Over half, 58%, of those murdered were sex workers, and 4 in 10 were European migrants, 43%. The report's release follows several years of human rights organizations worldwide recording yearly rises in violence against transgender people. But a further humbling and critical part of these figures' context is that the death total is likely only to be the tip of the iceberg. Many hate crimes and murders go unreported or, crucially, misreported in the media, meaning the actual number of deaths could be far higher. These numbers are just a small glimpse of the reality on the ground, says the report authors. The majority of the data was collected from countries with an established network of trans and LGBTQ organizations that conduct the monitoring. In most countries, data is not systematically collected. Most cases continue to go unreported and, when reported, receive very little attention. The list is compiled by Transrespect vs. Transphobia Worldwide, TVT, a TTU project, by sourcing local and national news stories covering the deaths and murders. The violence, horror and murders are catalogued by TVT, which has a complete list of all those killed this year. Times Square NYC, New York City, New York, United States, July 26, 2017. On July 26, 2017, after a series of tweets by President Donald Trump, which proposed to ban transgender people from military service, thousands of New Yorkers took the streets in opposition. Thousands of transgender soldiers are currently serving in all branches of the United States Armed Forces. Photo by Michael Negro / Pacific Press / Light Rocket via Getty Images. Light Rocket via Getty Images. The report is released annually to mark Transgender Day of Remembrance. The global list is part of an annual report released to mark the International Trans Day of Remembrance, held annually on November 20th, compiled by Transrespect vs. Transphobia Worldwide. Since 2008, the Trans Murder Monitoring Report has been recording homicides that happen every year between October 1st and September 30th. Since the project began 13 years ago, they have recorded 4,039 deaths. The number of fatalities has risen from 2019's 331 and 2020's 350 to 375 in 2021. Although we must view the data in the context of being the tip of the iceberg, the report authors note the alarming upwards trend throughout their data from 2008 to 2020. Behind the statistical representation of numbers and percentages, there are people whose lives we value and who we, as societies, fail to protect, report authors say. Meanwhile, a global recession in trans rights continues, with countries from Hungary, Poland and even the UK seeing rising transphobia, anti-LGBTQ policies and rhetoric. In the UK, transphobic hate crime reports have quadrupled over the last 6 years. Washington, D.C., United States, October 8, 2019. A giant trans flag unfurled outside the Supreme Court. 133 protesters were arrested blocking the street across the Supreme Court in an act of nonviolent civil disobedience, as hundreds of LGBTQ+ advocates convened in Washington, D.C. for a National Day of Action as a community response to the landmark Supreme Court hearings that could legalize workplace discrimination, primarily against LGBTQ+ people, on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender presentation. Photo by Eric McGregor / Light Rocket via Getty Images. Light Rocket via Getty Images. When is Transgender Day of Remembrance 2021? Trans Day of Remembrance, TDR, is a day that remembers those trans and gender diverse people who have been victims of homicide. Though the event began in the U.S., TDR now happens in many parts of the world. Vigils are usually held in person all around the world. But due to the pandemic and varying levels of lockdowns and restrictions, The community is expected to take to social media alongside physical events and join together in grief and remembrance. The International Transgender Day of Remembrance is held on November 20th, 2021.
Okay, so there you have that. So as you can see at the bottom of that article, that this is something that yet another social, I don't know how to characterize it, social idealism that is exported from the United States to the rest of the world, that the rest of the world pretty much doesn't want to have anything to do with. You see this in the Marvel movies. You see this, we're pushing all of this gay representation and trans representation and all of these different forms of media. And these people are pushing hard to get this injected all over the place. And you see these numbers, from, okay, they put the total number of people, and they, again, throughout that, basically these numbers, don't pay that close attention to these numbers, because these numbers may be greater. They may be far higher because of whatever, but I could have the same argument as with regard to black men being murdered, black women being murdered. These numbers may be far higher, but no one's doing anything about it. But they're willing to, do all of these different things for 4,039 people within, 2021, and the data for 2020 and 2022 are, I'm sure, consistent with these years. So they also talk about let's see here, the trend being upwardly mobile and whatnot. The trends are upwardly mobile with us as well. And they went going up to these numbers where they, in this article, where they address, the high numbers of those being murdered being in sex work. Okay. And this is in the United States and globally. These people are are involved in sex work and, are trans individuals. And one of the things that they're leaving out about this is that these people don't identify themselves. Even when you talk about them not identifying themselves, and some do. I'm not sure what the numbers are with regard to the groups who identifies and those compared to those who don't identify. But we just saw on Kendra G's show where she had a trans woman on there, and she did not want to identify her sexuality on there, but she said that she was kind of getting that vibe from the woman, but she said, you can talk to me about that off the air. So, one would gather from that this individual is out here looking for men as if they are biological women, and they're not. So with that comes certain potential outcomes. And when these outcomes happen, people absolve themselves from any responsibility or for the violence that takes place as a result of that deception. So I think that needs to be brought up. And, they talk about this, where they talk about the report notes, the number of, excuse me, the numbers indicate a worrying trend when it comes to intersections of misogyny, racism, xenophobia, and hate towards sex workers. Okay, so that's a big, turkey, chicken, sausage sandwich of a whole bunch of different things that they want us to believe go together. And in some ways, and in certain specific instances, these things do go together, but in some they don't. They have nothing to do with each other. So, these things, we have to be careful when we read these articles, because there are a lot of things wrapped up into these articles to pull out a lot of different emotions as you read the factual data. So I say that to show that, and to highlight that you should, try to pull the data from this and deal with it accordingly. So let's look at here on Statista, the number of transgendered and gender diverse people who were murdered in the United States. Okay. Now, as you can see, these numbers are a lot lower than what was just put in that article. Okay. And no need to read this, but 2008, 17, 2009, 14, 2010, 9. 2010, 9. Okay. 2011, 17, 2012, 17, 2013, 23, 2014, 14, 2015, 22, 2016, 27, 2017, 29, 2018, 23, 2019, 31, 2020, 28, 2021, 53. Okay. And they show their sources. I will put this data down there. And this is from crime and law enforcement data that they gathered. Okay. So we're going to move over to another one with Statista, and murder in the United States. A number of murder victims in the United States in 2020 by race, ethnicity, and gender. Okay, so here you have a chart here that shows the total numbers of murders at 17,754. That's broken down to 14,146 men, 3,573 women, and 35 unknown. Okay, by that number alone, we can gather that if we're going to be putting resources towards a certain sector for the number of murders to get those down, then we need to be putting it where the larger numbers are, and then down towards the lower numbers, right? That will be logical. Okay, so let's look at it broken down by white. Okay, white males. Okay, the total by white people is 7,029. The number of white males was 5,123. The number of females, white females, was 1,904. Okay, 1,904. Okay, now let's look at black people. Black people, total number was 9,913. The total males of black males murdered was 8,469. Number of black females was 1,440. Okay, the numbers that they couldn't identify in that black category were 4. Okay, the numbers of unidentified whites were 2. Okay, now other races, it was 497 total. Total other race males were 340. Total other race females were 157, and no unknown other race murders. Okay, unknown race murders were 315. Unknown race males were 214. Unknown race females were 72, and unknowns were 29. Hispanic or Latino deaths were 2,847. Okay, that of the Hispanic or Latino males was 2,377. Hispanic or Latino females was 470. And the Hispanic and Latino unknowns were 0. Not Hispanic or Latino was 11,347. Not Hispanic or Latino males was 8,993. Not Hispanic or Latino females was 2,350. Not Hispanic or Latino unknowns were 4. Okay. Now, the unknown total was 1,985. The male unknowns were 1,581. The unknown females were 379. The unknown unknowns were 25. So as you can see from just that 1 year, the number of black males being murdered in the United States, for whatever reason, was extremely high. The numbers of black people was extremely high, far greater than whites, Hispanic or Latinos, other races, unknown races. The only one that was greater was the ones that were not Hispanic or Latino, which was 11,347. But other than that, we were almost 10,000 black people murdered. But there's this aversion to addressing our issues with being murdered in the United States by black people being murdered in the United States. Now, I'm sure if I go back even further, I'm sure this number was far greater. But I did this, just to, put this in context. Now, this is the very reason why black people who were initially fighting against being lumped into these other marginalized groups is why it's very important that you don't have those resources being leached off towards these other groups, because if the resources are being leached off to these other groups, then you have less money and less resources to deal with the problems in your community, and your community starts to be lost in the rat race towards trying to gain resources. This is why the civil rights community and black folks push towards being recognized for political power in this country is so important to do as a group, and not as black females, black trans folks, black males, and all of that. We are the only group of people who do that, and we're suffering. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on from this, and I hope that this was informative, and puts things into context with regard to how we should be trying to deal with some of these things. This is definitely not something that we need to not take seriously. We need to start as black men, especially. I think, and I'm going to say this on every chance I get. We need to move in solidarity towards taking over the one party that we do have a voice in order to get our needs addressed and met. And we need to start to hold these public officials accountable, and we need to start to show that this has been tracked ever since the Monahan Report, the Kerner Commission, all the way back to E. Franklin Frazier's first data was being published. The Black Ghetto addressed this as well, as you can see in some of BGS's work. All of these things need to be addressed because they haven't been addressed, and resources have not been allocated to the places where they will do the most good with regard to our community. And we have people who are trying their best to get their little piece out of it, i.e. Black feminists, Black trans individuals, people who just want to basically get their position in the limelight in order to leech off resources from the greater needs. The LGBT community wants to amend the Civil Rights Bill for what is tantamount to their personal choice regarding sexuality, or what they consider to be whatever gender that they want to ascribe to at any given moment. That is should be separate. That should be a separate bill. Every time they amend the Civil Rights Bill, we suffer. And we can historically show that we suffer as a community. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and end it. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you guys haven't been following Matt Walsh's work on this, I think it is highly enlightening with regard to the types of individuals that we are being confronted with. And the targets of the groups, what they want more exposure, they want more access to resources, but at whose expense? I would say at our expense. So thank you guys for listening, and I hope this was informative, and you guys have a great day, night, or whenever you're listening to it. And I am out.
I feel like a